Good afternoon and welcome to our session on Design, Align, Refine, 3 simple steps for orchestrating student engagement in the distance learning environment. We are so excited that you're here with us this afternoon, and we are excited to learn with you how we can increase engagement in instruction. I am Stephanie Hulon. I'm the director of the South Alabama Research and In-Service Center, and I'm going to let my co-facilitators introduce themselves.
Well, I am Patty Mays, and I'm the In-Service Center Director at Athens State In-Service Center, and so happy to be with you all this afternoon and look forward to our learning together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Holly Morgan. I'm the director of the UA-UWA Regional In-Service Center. And just like Patty and Stephanie have already said, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to be with you.
Well, let's get started. We have a few housekeeping ideas that we want to share with you. And one of them is the social wall. This is new to me, so I'm excited to learn about the social wall with you. But typically, right, we've all been Zooming through the last year. And so we've been able to use interactive features like the chat window, breakout rooms. Well, we don't have those features in this session today, but we do have a powerful feature called the social wall, and that's within the conference app. And so we're going to be using that to share resources with you. And that's how we're going to also hear from you and how you're going to share ideas with everyone else who's in the session. And so you access the social wall by clicking on the session. And then to the right, as you can see on the screen, you should see several items. And one of those items that you will see is the social wall. And when you click on that, you'll be able to see links that we're sharing with you, directions or our thoughts. That's how you'll be able to share ideas when we ask you questions as well. We thought we would just practice with the social wall to get us started. So if you could go ahead and use the social wall to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, share your name, your current location, and your current position. Who all do we have here this afternoon?
And if you need assistance in locating the social wall, please, you can send us some information or contact possibly the help desk, and make sure you've downloaded the conference app.
Yes, thank you so much, Holly. And we have some great tech support in the room with us right now, and they shared that there's a little bit of a delay. So while everyone is posting to the social wall, I'm going to keep sharing some information so that we have some time to work together and learn together. We're going to start with our learning targets for the session this afternoon. So what we want to do in our time together is really look at how we define the characteristics of student engagement, how we design engaging instructional tasks for students in the virtual environment, and how we select and align appropriate technology tools for instructional tasks. And then once we have thought about the instructional task, right, selected the technology tool, how do we refine that instructional task? So our first learning target, I can define the characteristics of student engagement. When I hear about engagement in the classroom, I cannot help but think of this clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And we probably, before I even play it, you probably can say it in your mind, right? Where he goes, Bueller, Bueller, right? Because that's a classroom where we don't see a lot of engagement. So let's take just a moment to watch this clip.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone, Great Depression, passed the, the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics, voodoo economics.
Well, that's what we don't want in our classrooms, right? Students sleeping on the desk, chewing on that pencil, right? We want them engaged. We want them to be engaged with the content, and we want them to show us their learning. And I would say this is specifically on the distance learning environment, but that would also translate to the face-to-face classroom as well. And so Patty, Holly, and I had an opportunity to learn from Doug Fisher earlier this year at the beginning of this academic year. And a lot of what we're talking about today is from the distance learning playbook written by Fisher, Frey, and Hattie. And this is something that Doug Fisher shared with us in that session that we attended with him in the fall. And it was, what does student engagement look like from the distance learning environment? And so these particular pictures are from a class where it was a home economics class, and they were learning how to cook different meals. And so the particular school had closed for the pandemic. And what this particular school did is they sent the fresh fruits and vegetables and the ingredients that they would use typically in the classroom, they sent it to the students' homes. And the students would make recipes, they would involve their family, and then they would record the process and their learning through the process through pictures or videos. And you can see in all of these pictures, right, we see families getting engaged, we see smiles on their faces. If we were to contrast both of those, these pictures versus that video, we would see a different type of engagement in the students in the video versus the students in the pictures that we're seeing. So we're going to take just a moment to go back to that social wall and think about, what evidence do you have that students are engaged virtually in your classes, right? We've spent the last year teaching in a blended format, possibly teaching in a completely 100% distance learning environment. How do you know that the students are engaged in your lessons virtually? Go ahead and share that for us on the social wall. And I'm going to flip back really quickly just to give us that graphic of how to get there in the conference app or on the conference tracker website. Remember, once you click on the session to the far right of your screen, you'll see that social wall, and that's where you're able to share with us the evidence that you've seen with your students to know that they're engaged in the virtual learning environment. Because we have a little bit of a delay on that social wall, we're going to give us a few minutes to post, and then we're going to share some of the thoughts that come through the social wall.
Stephanie, do you mind clicking back to the picture with the virtual photos? There you go. Thanks. Right, Tracy shared with us that she only really knew when students were engaged when they had turned in work or had questions about an assignment. And I agree with that. I'm just curious, from these pictures that we see on our presentation, I wonder, um, do we have any evidence from these pictures if anyone is engaged in learning? Responding to their work and their discussion activities and posts. And when I look at these pictures in this slideshow, I can tell that these students are really engaged just by, you see them at different stages of the lesson. You see those students that are receiving the fruits. You see one that is in the process of making their item. They're actually mixing. You got that parent in the background or an adult in the background pointing to it, which is really funny to me. But then you have someone at the end, where they have created their cookies and they're showing those. And so to me, that is showing some things that they are actively engaged. They are producing something. Yes, I like the ones that smiles on their faces. Absolutely. Their facial expressions. They produced a product for sure. We can see the evidence of their learning. Absolutely, like that. Yeah. All great comments. Thank you for responding and sharing with us. Stephanie, if you will, let's go forward and let's look at this continuum of engagement. This continuum is really interesting to me. It's actually a model that was created by Amy Berry, who is a researcher. And what she did is she did some research where she conducted some semi-structured interviews with 15 upper primary school teachers, and just asking them, because she was interested to know what they what their perspective was on student engagement. And what she found in her study is that teachers really described in general 6 qualitatively different forms of engagement and disengagement. And so you see here those 6 areas. 3 of those are forms of engagement, where you see participating, investing, and driving. And then 3 are actually forms of disengagement, withdrawing, avoiding, and disrupting. But she just found that in her responses, these teachers perceived student engagement in one of these areas, and at different levels. So what she wanted to do is to show some way of looking at the degree of which a student was engaged. And so this continuum offers a model for us to look at and say, where are our students in their engagement or disengagement, and can we move them? Because ultimately, when you look at this, we want them at the driving category. We want them to be setting their goals and seeking feedback and self-assessing in everything that they do. That's when we truly know that they are fully engaged. So this continuum is just a model that we can use to help us in reflecting on our student engagement. All right, so we're going to now look at our learning target number 2, which says, I can design engaging instructional tasks for students in the virtual environment. So we're going to look at that design side of it. And something that we want to share with you here is just some best practices in engaging instructional or designing engaging instructional tasks. And these are not new. These are not new ideas. We just want to bring them back to our forefront in our memory and look at them. And as we look at them, I think the one thing that I really want you to look, or the lens that I want you to look through this is with a distant learning or virtual environment lens, because a lot of this we did in face-to-face or in-person learning, but there's a few things that changed, actually more than a few, a lot of that changed when we moved to a virtual environment. And one of those is, how we group, because we probably struggled with grouping of our students. In the classroom, we could quickly move chairs around and put people in, but when we went to a virtual, depending on the platform you were using, that might have been limited how you group students. If you weren't comfortable with breakout rooms, or if you weren't using a platform that gave you the option of doing breakout rooms or some form of breakout rooms, then that really became a challenge as well. We also wanted to use a blended approach where you were using some synchronous work and some asynchronous work, kind of mix that up. But in the classroom, it's always important. It's always been important for us to provide feedback. And it became even more important, I think, when it moved to a virtual environment, because that informal feedback needed to come to the students or be provided to students in a frequent manner. And so that may have been a challenge to you. And if not, you probably had a really great method or a strategy in place. And but if it was, how did you do that, and what could you do to improve it? We also want to think about the type of act to provide or to design an engaging instructional task. We want to make sure that they are meaningful. We want students to do things that are that make connections with them, and that they are related to, and that they can fully understand, because it's going to really help them in their learning. And I always like this last one, because this is what Stephen Covey always talks about: begin with the end in mind. And I think when you are planning lessons, especially instructional tasks for the virtual environment, you have to begin with the end in mind. You have to think, what is the end goal? And what is it that I want my students to be able to do at the end? And keep that on your mind the entire time, from the beginning to the middle to the end, because that's going to drive the way you instruct. Right. So, in the book, like Stephanie was saying, we had the opportunity to learn with Distance Learning Playbook by Doug Fisher. And one of the things that he talks about is what you see here on your screen. These are some task design principles, and there are 4 of them, and they're not really, if you'll pay attention to what's underlined, that's kind of how they are categorized. But when you are designing tasks with engagement in mind, you really want to design tasks that are open tasks, or what they consider to be open tasks. You want to have students think in more than one way. They need to be able to enter that task at different levels or at different points. And so that's what they mean when they're talking about an open task. And we have a short video. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to show that video, but I tell you what, Stephanie, if you'll click on the pose problems to students that can be solved in multiple ways, we can maybe just see a few seconds. I put the top in red. Yeah, there you go. We'll see a few minutes. Well, not a few minutes, but a few seconds of this video, because it's really cool. I like watching kids that are in virtual environment. And I can't hear it. Stephanie, I wonder if you have to unmute.
You guys have done a really good job.
I'm so sorry. I did have to unmute. Okay, let's try this again.
Guys, today we're going to go over our work on Seesaw. And I wanted to highlight some video responses that I've had from friends who are turning in their science work. You guys have done a really good job, and I have a 2nd grader and a 3rd grader who did an amazing job in their videos explaining their knowledge and the science content. Today, you are going to be looking at storms still. And today you went from looking at how clouds evaporate to how clouds are formed. And now you're going to start looking at storms and how some places in climate are always hot and some places do get a lot of storms. So you're going to focus on that today in your link. When you click your link, it's going to take you to the mystery science video. And when you return from Mystery Science, you're going to click Add Response. And I have the Mystery Science work already posted for you, where you follow what Mystery Doug tells you step by step. And you make sure you complete the sheets here. And then you record yourself explaining what you're doing. So I wanted to show some recordings some friends have done for previous lessons, so you can start thinking of what you are going to record when you say your video. So I wanted to share Jacob and Azalea's, but first, do I have permission, Jacob, from you and from you, Azalea, to share your videos? Thank you guys for letting me share. I'm going to start with Azalea. And she did a great explanation on where do clouds come from. This is both for Jacob and Azalea. So let's start with Azalea.
Clouds are not fluffy. They're made of tiny drops of water, just like steam, which is a liquid gas. Water is clear, but when all the tiny drops of water are together, it is white. Examples are waterfalls, waves, and liquid gas.
All right, so you see in this video how the teacher is giving them the instructions, but it's kind of open task in the fact that the kids can approach that task the way that they want. And this little girl chose to present by using her notes. And if you download this presentation and you watch that video in its entirety, you'll see that the teacher then goes back and really talks to the students about how this little girl has chosen to present and how she has taken notes and highlights the different strategies that the students are using. So that's what we mean when we're talking about an open task. And so the next that we want to talk about are understanding tasks. And that's just simply put, these are the kinds of tasks that require students to really connect and relate to it. And I think about that task that we were just looking at pictures of with the baking. You know, I think that really makes a connection with students because that is something that they are interested in, especially if they were having to be at home anyway. It got them out of their bedroom or out of or up from a couch and into another room. And so you may want to think about those kinds of tasks when you're thinking about an understanding task. Also, the next task that we want to talk about are asking tasks, where you are just asking a student what they think first rather than just telling them. Maybe you ask them, start off a lesson with a question and then let them start responding to that question rather than you just telling them all the facts. I know when I was teaching science and really focused on science, that was a really great way to teach science, is to start off with a scientific question. And then the kids had to find a way to answer your question. So that's what we mean when we're talking about asking tasks. And the last one is a problem-solving task. You're positioning students in your lesson or in the task itself to plan a way forward by moving from procedure to a problem solving, where they are actually in that seat driving and having to come up with a solution. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take these tasks, these 4 different types of tasks: open task, understanding task, asking, and problem solving task. And we're going to ask you to think about a task that you have, maybe it's one that you have done throughout this past year, something that comes to mind. Even if you were in person, it could be a task that you did in person, but it's, specifically if you were in a virtual environment, maybe a task that you did with your students in a virtual environment. And we're going to flash up in just a moment a document that's going to ask you to post the task or to write in the task. And you can see this link in or on your social wall. So you can click on that link. And I want you to just name the task, but then I want you to categorize it. Was it an open task? Would you say that it was an open task, an understanding task, an asking, or a problem solving task? And just identify what type of task it was. Because what we're going to do in going forward, we're going to take these tasks and we're going to move through the process of aligning some technology with them, and then really looking at that technology and making sure that it's the right kind of technology to be using with that particular task. So if you take just a moment and type in your task and the type of task it was, we will go forward in just a moment, but we're going to give you time to fill out this. And Stephanie, if you don't mind going back to slide 14, just to, in case they have questions about what type of task it is. The link is in or on the social wall. So if you need to click on that link, and then these are the descriptions of those four types of tasks: open, understanding, asking, and problem solving. All right, we're going to give you about 2 more minutes. If you haven't finished, if you will try to finish the task you're on. All right, Stephanie, if you don't mind going to the document for us and let us look at some of these responses. Oh, great. Whodunit, discussion boards, problem solving, virtual field trips, rubric-based projects, design your ancient civilization. All right, good answers. All right, so what I would like for us to do, and if you're still writing, go ahead and continue. We're going to move forward with the presentation so we have time today for everything we want to do. We want to move on to learning target number 3, which is I can select and align appropriate technology tools for instructional tasks. So now we want to take those instructional tasks and begin to think about the technology that maybe we used. And if we didn't use technology, what would be the possible tools, or what would be some possible tools that we could use to make it more engaging? And one of the things that I remember most when we were attending some of the sessions with Doug Fisher is I remember one day and this took a load off of me when he said it. He said, we have so many teachers bogged down with all the different kinds of tools. There are so many tools. And he said, quit worrying about all the tools. Find the one tool that fits best with the task and use that tool. And when he said that, it kind of took a lot of pressure off of me, because it made me really think about, I don't have to know how to use all the tools, but I need to know the right tool and I need to know how to use it. And that made things seem easier for me. So one of the quotes that he said is, the purpose of the task guides the selection of the technology tool. And so if we begin to really think and make sure that we are answering that for what is the purpose of this task and what's the best tool, and maybe not have to have 10 tools, but what's the best tool, and focus on that one tool, or maybe it's 2 tools, but I would not bog yourself down with all the tools. So we want to look at a chart that came from the book of the Distance Learning Playbook, and they identify 4 functions: finding information, using information, creating information, and sharing information. These are really 4 functions of learning. And why we would use tools. We use tools to find information. We use certain tools for using our information in some way, or creating the information. And so you see some sample tools there on the right column that fit into those different categories. And I'll give you a moment to look at those. You've probably heard, and I have children at home, and I remember them talking about Quizlet. They talked about Kahoot. Google Docs was a big one. Remind, YouTube. But some of these I didn't hear them talk so much about, and you may not know how all these tools work. So I want you to just study this chart for a second, and then think back to the task. And I want to ask yourself this question: how can I use the distance learning a tool evaluation to ensure that my tool is aligned with my task? And so that distance learning tool evaluation is a document like this, and it just takes us through a few questions about a specific tool. So let's say I wanted to look at Quizlet, and I would take Quizlet and I would answer the question, what learning function does this tool fulfill? And answer that. And then, is this tool or site developmentally appropriate for my students? Some of these examples that we saw on the previous slide are not appropriate for all ages. So we have to be careful and make sure that it's age appropriate and developmentally appropriate, that the kids can use it. And does it have the accessibility features that are aligned to digital compliance requirements? For example, do we have students that have vision problems or hearing problems? Are there ways that they can access the tools? And is it accessible for them in meeting all the requirements that we need to adhere to? And then there is just a key features checklist that you can do for each of these tools. But this document is very helpful to use for the tools that you want to use for your task. And it will help you, if you really take the time to look at this evaluation, it will help you to identify whether or not that tool is really the right tool for what you're doing. All right, so we're going to begin the next activity, and then Holly's going to come in here and help close us out for the day. But we're going to take that instructional task that you identified earlier, one of the tasks that you maybe have put on the slide, and we're going to think about the distance learning evaluation tool. And we're also going to think about the, and Stephanie's clicking on this common sense work, which I think is fabulous. If you'll scroll down on this one, Stephanie, the thing about, if you've never visited commonsense.org, this really takes each of these tools, or all kinds of tools I have never even heard of, and it evaluates them. It tells you a little bit about them, and then when you click on the See Full Review, it will give the ratings, it gives learning ratings, it gives, as you even scroll down further on that, I'd say that one's got a warning, which is nice, and you'd want to, see what that is all about. It gives you grade levels, it gives you some clips of different aspects of that tool. Also gives you some pros and cons. How can you teach with that tool, which is very helpful because it may give you some ideas that you hadn't thought about. Also kind of gives you the learning rating down at the bottom. I love that it gives you an engagement rating for those. So that is a great tool to use to help you decide on the best tool for the task that you're going to be using. So take a moment and revisit the task that we gave you at the beginning, and begin to think about the tools that you could use for that task. And so, Stephanie, if you'll click over to that document, we'll see. Oh, we got some people doing that. Awesome. Even telling us the type. The function. Good. I'm going to give you a few moments to continue to do that. Oh. Yeah, look at your social wall. There's some good suggestions there from Dr. Mabin, Technology and Motion Specialist, that's joining us today. So check out what he said in the social wall.
All right, I see several of you are still typing, and thank you, Patty, for talking about that connection between the tools and the type of task. So just to recap as you're continuing, because remember, we're going to add one other level to this because our session today is about designing, aligning, and refining. So we're going to take this a step further. So I want to give you just another minute or so to finish up and determine which technology tool you could align with your task. See a lot of fans of Ed Puzzle in the social wall, me too. But you may want to try Play Posit as well. You can find more information about that in the Common Sense tool that Patty shared with you. One other thing really quick, Stephanie, if you'll scroll up on that as go back to one slide. One of the things as Patty was talking through this is it's actually organized by the type of response that you're trying to get. So if you scroll down, for example, the first few examples with Edge Elastic, if you're looking for an interactive lesson in video, and I saw some of you posting that in your task spreadsheet earlier. And then Stephanie, if you'll scroll down a little more. There's some other categories, for example, response, clickers, those kinds of things. So if you're trying to find, there it is, ooh, quizzing, polling, and student response, these are the type tools that you could use for that purpose. So even here on commonsense.org, they are aligning the purpose, just as Patty talked about, the purpose of the task, what type of response that you are trying to use to determine student engagement, and aligning it with the correct tool. Yes, and discussion. So definitely check out that site. It's a great resource. It's a great resource to get together with your colleagues in grade level or department teams, and to look at, maybe you have experience with one and not another, and it could be something that you investigate as a team and using different tools. All right. So if you're not finished with that, oh, great. I see some other people, lots of Schoology represented today. Google Tools, Blackboard. Just remember to keep working on that for the next couple of minutes before we go on to the next layer. All right. So our next learning target is our final one for the day. I can refine the instructional task. And I was meeting with a group earlier this morning, and one of the things that one of the participants shared out was, well, you know, so very often I implement, but I may not actually go back and evaluate what I was implementing. I may just want to toss it if I feel like it didn't work well. And so that's really what we're going to be honing in on. This is, yes, you've created this task, you're going to implement this task, but you may want to revisit it. Maybe it worked really well and there's something you could add, or maybe you just need to refine it for the future. And we're going to use the information from the distance learning playbook again, that's already been referenced, but there are a few ways that we can refine a task. And Fisher and Fry really designate that refinement as how we make learning better for students and how we make learning better for teachers, looking at those two groups. So when we make learning better for students, here's a couple of tips that they share. Really focus on what students know and don't know. So that goes back to designing maybe that open task that you're going to allow them to demonstrate their learning, which will help you as the teacher be able to observe maybe what's missing in there. How can I provide them feedback to help them move forward? This one's huge. It's what we've already been talking about in the social wall. And I will just tell you up front, when we originally designed this presentation, we had breakout rooms and we had so much opportunity for interaction. But with the system that's being used with the social wall, we had to say, oh my goodness, how are we going to go back and refine what we had planned for today so that we could give you the most opportunity for social interaction, since you can unmute and talk with us and you can't show your camera to us so that we could see your face. So we had to rethink exactly what we're asking you to do and refine the process. And really, social interaction is huge. I'm missing your faces right now, and I'm loving going to the social wall and the documents that we've shared so we can see some of the evidence of your thinking. Feedback, just already discussed that. And then this one I thought was really timely during this pandemic era. Worry more about subjects that parents are least likely to be able to help with. So in other words, in a virtual environment, front load those things that you don't want parents to be going over as much at home or consistently practicing or helping with. Front load those. And we all know in the elementary grades, parents typically say, oh, I can help with spelling words. I can do some of these other things. And so that's the things that you wouldn't front load as much in the classroom. And the next one is make learning better for teachers, which is the other category. And really the authors just say to consider these questions so that how you can assist with the professional learning needs that you may have. So how can we learn how groups of teachers can evaluate, discuss, and work together? Going back to Hattie's collective efficacy, how can we all build and have the most impactful effect size? How can we discover ways to enhance that collective efficacy? So maybe if you already have professional learning communities, how can you make them better? How can you refine? How can we engage with parents? And how can we assess our impact in distance learning? And I'm sure that the reason you're here, you already know how important student engagement is. But we just want to emphasize here the importance and how, going back to what Patty mentioned in the first part of today's session, how you can move along that continuum of engagement to actually put your students in the driver's seat. If you remember from that chart, driving was at the far extreme of the highest level of student engagement. And when students are engaged and connect learning with their everyday lives, they are 14 times more likely to be academically motivated. And I know we've had so many discussions pre-COVID and during COVID about motivation. How many times, I'm sure you've never said this, but I said it in my classroom, if they would just want to do it, or if they were just with me. And, that's not just a distance learning issue. That's a face-to-face issue as much. How do we get kids motivated to be intrinsically motivated to want to do it? And so I think this quote is huge. And then another text that you may want to reference that we're going to see in the next couple of slides is Engagement by Design by Fisher and Fry. And I think this is huge. It's not the sole responsibility of the teacher. It's important that we teach strategies to our students so that they can monitor themselves and persevere. Going back to those metacognitive strategies, how do we get them to self-evaluate and want to persevere in their learning? And a couple of diagrams that really address that. How do we get them to move past just the lowest level task or the lowest level of complexity? And you see in the quadrants here, instead of focusing on easy to hard, we're going to focus on each level, difficulty and complexity. And what they mean in this text in Engagement by Design is difficulty means the amount. So it's not mentally how taxing it is, it's the amount. So it's thinking about 100 math problems versus 5 math problems. Complexity is actually going back to the rigor of what it is. So is this task, for example, taxing on me? And Stephanie, if you'll go ahead and click again, it should have, yes, our quadrant categories coming up. So thinking about that lowest level with fluency, if it's low difficulty and low complexity, you're choosing this task to build fluency. No, I don't just mean reading fluency, but math fluency, maybe fluency with facts. In other words, they're not addressing their problem solving skills. It's a repetitive practice. And then if you move up to the top quadrant, you see strategic thinking and struggle over the fluency and stamina. And those are really the categories we want to get to. We want to get to that strategic thinking. So low difficulty, maybe 2 to 5 math problems, but the complexity is high. Multi-step, they have to think through, show their thinking process, and then struggle, high difficulty and high complexity. Stamina, and we'll see some examples on the next screen, is really just to build their procedural knowledge. So let's see, Stephanie, if you'll go to the next slide. You see some examples of each of these 4 quadrants. So I was saying with stamina, it's independent reading, building their reading muscles, as we often say in literacy, at text that is at a just right level for them. You see fluency, we already talked about, repeated reading, space practice. And then you see the very different other side of the coin there with strategic thinking and struggle. So we're trying to move past the fluency and stamina into the more complex task. And actually earlier this year, as we were leading studies around Fisher and Fry's work, I had one participant share with me, she said, oh my, I think I've only been in the fluency quadrant this year because I really didn't know how to push past that while we were all in distance learning. And hey, I don't know about you, but we were all learning that, right? We were learning, first of all, the technology and the ways of being in a virtual mode. And so it was just a great discussion that day because she realized, okay, I've just been trying to focus on getting comfortable with the technology. Now I need to focus on the task that I'm giving the students. So let's look at our last activity. We have designed, we have aligned, and now we are refining. So in our links document and coming up, you see it there in the social wall, Patty has posted our Jamboard. And what we would like you to think about is that original task you posted in the first table. How could you now refine that task using the difficulty and complexity quadrants? So Stephanie has pulled up that Jamboard. You can access it. And Stephanie, would you go back to the presentation? They may want to take a couple of screenshots of those charts. Also, you have the link to our entire presentation. It's listed in the links document if you'd like to look there as well. But just so that they have a couple of examples, if you'll go back one more, that way they can see some examples. How could you refine your task to make it more complex? And you can look on slide 26 and also just see how those play out, difficulty versus complexity. So we're going to give you a few minutes to post those ideas in the Jamboard. If you're unfamiliar with Jamboard, maybe it's a tool that you've not used, let me give you a little backup instruction. If you will go to the left side of your screen and you see there are multiple tools there on the left side of your screen, click on the one that says sticky note. And once you click on that, a sticky note comes up, you can type into it and then click save, and it will show up on our Jamboard screen. How might you refine your task using the difficulty complexity quadrants? Oh, great. I see we already have one response. For virtual field trips, I could have students design a field trip to their favorite historical spot. That's right. Instead of you taking them on the field trip, put them in the driver's seat of their learning and have them design. And you could incorporate math. You could have them do a budget for their virtual field trip. You could incorporate geography and have them map out the distance and the path they'll take to get there. Now that would be interesting. I need to have my own 11-year-old do that as well. Great. What else? Take just another couple of minutes. How could you up the level of complexity? And many of you are thinking, that sounds like that word rigor as well. How could I up that level for my students based on the task I've selected? Anybody else? Any other ideas on the Jamboard? Oh, here's another one. For the whodunit discussions, students must convince a student with a different conclusion to the puzzle why their answer is wrong. Excellent. So justification absolutely is upping the level of complexity as well. Yes. Could have a nice friendly debate of your side of the answer, who did it, and another side. Excellent. All right. Well, we are going to leave up these links. They will not close out. So maybe you're still thinking about your answer and response. And then that way, as others respond, you will still have those same ideas to carry with you. We hope that you have gained a little bit of knowledge and or ideas for implementation as you go back to school in the fall. And we are so thankful that you joined us today for this session. And as we close out, just feel free, I think on the next slide, Stephanie, you have our contact information. So please feel free to reach out to us. As Regional In-Service Center Directors, there are 11 in the state, and we just invite you. We want to assist you. We want to support you in your professional learning needs. So feel free, if we are not your Regional In-Service Center Director, to contact your own, and you can find that map on the alsde.edu page. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for posting on all of the links and documents that we had today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.